suddenly, after Islamic Republic, religion became a very, important part of people's public life. There were people in the government, they followed this, utopian, Islamic world by creating Islamic knowledge. They tried to impose, dress codes, force students, to participate in, a compulsory prayers. You suddenly find yourself, with a completely different version of Islam, which was harsh, which was not tolerant. And so it raised the question, what is the relation between science and religion?
What was the reason of you being uncomfortable rather than assenting? What was the reason for your dissent?
A group of fuqaha, jurists, they defined what Islam is. And that was not the kind of Islam I was exposed to. I knew Islam through the lens of mystics, Rumi, which is actually a combination of love and beauty.
You were looking for Islam like, oh, it's all about Rumi and all. And then when you started studying Islam and doing it properly, how did this impact your relationship with Islam?
First thing that attracted me to this kind of intellectual approach to Islam was a paper, a talk, a lecture that Professor Abdul Karim Soroush delivered in Mashhad. The Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, delivered a very harsh, public speech. And in his speech, he actually criticized, Soroush's talk as, hand of enemies and so on and so forth.
Why Reform? We are happy where we are. And why will we listen to someone like you?
We are suffering of some sort of schizophrenia. On one hand, when we are in the corner of our prayers and we are worshiping God, we are living, in 12th century. But then we go to the work, when we go to the university, suddenly we are a part of, 21st century. If you want to survive in this society, you have to redefine your relationship with religion.
But Islam means surrendering, or the Taslim means surrender. So the Muslim is to surrender your will. Right? So I'm being Islamic, so I'm surrendering my will and I'm just following the law of God.
Surrendering your will is a willful act. What is the value of a religion if it is forced upon you? If it is not, chosen freely out of your deep desire for God?
The traditional jurist is not saying you should live the life I want. He said you should live the way God wants.
The way I understand it.
So how would you say that?
The kind of, Islam Al-Ghazali had was fundamentally different than the kind of Islam, for example, Ayatollah Khomeini exercised or Rumi advocated. The Taliban, they are Muslims, and your institutions, you are Muslims, right? They are all Muslims, but they have different understanding of God's ways. One of the challenges modern human being is facing is the lack of meaning in their lives. We are living in the crisis, in love crisis. We are living in a world in which, sex and, bodily pleasure, they replace that kind of tender emotion. In this, corrupted, social structure, it is really, really difficult to have a flourishing spiritual, aesthetic, beautiful, spiritual experiences.
What does mysticism still has to offer to a modern human? In the journey of learning and unlearning collectively, today I'm delighted to have with me Dr. Arash Naraghi.
Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Arash Naraghi is a professor of philosophy and global religion at Moravian University. He has received a PhD in philosophy from the University of California in focusing on ethics and philosophy of religion. Dr. Arash is an expert in a lot of fields: ethics, philosophy of religion, Islamic mysticism, and contemporary Shiism in Iran. So I'm hoping to get a lot of thoughts here to think about. So to begin with, while I was going through your biography and I was reading about you, I saw that this is not the only PhD you had. So you had a PhD before in pharmacology.
That's
so
true.
Pharmacology and Islamic studies, two widely different disciplines. In one way, the one is about the body and the other is about the soul. But what made this shift?
Yeah, I think when I got to the university, it was shortly after reopening of the universities after Islamic Republic. And suddenly, after Islamic Republic, religion became a very, important part of people's public life in politics, in in art, and including in universities. And since I was a student of science, I was studying pharmacology at the time. Uh, so some people from outside of the university, they try to impose religious doctrines into different branches of science. And so it raised the question, what is the relation between science and religion? So as a student of science, that was one of the first questions I seriously, faced. And I had to reconcile my interest in science and my intellectual curiosity about the relation between science and religion. So I think that was the beginning of my philosophical reflection in a more systematic way. So while I was studying pharmacology at Tehran University, I participated and attended, in different, classes in humanities, in philosophy, history, and so on and so forth. And that ultimately cultivated my personal interest and passion for humanities. So I became more and more involved in humanities, especially in philosophy. And I started with, learning about philosophy of science, how we should understand science. And then through have a better understanding of science, how we can conceive the relation between science and religion. And so that interest in philosophy of science gradually, pushed me to the direction of exploring religion in a more systematic and more substantial way. And so that was the beginning of a very long journey. Nowadays, of course, for variety of reasons, I'm teaching different courses in philosophy in general. But I think my passion still is in philosophy of religion, ethics, and more specifically, what you may call moral theology. That means, it's a intersection between ethics and theology, philosophical theology. How, for example, let me give you an example. For example, when we talk about the problem of evil, right? It seems the existence of evil in this world, challenges God's moral perfection. And so, on one hand, we are talking about moral issues. On the other hand, it is about God. So the intersection of these two fields, you may call it moral theology, which is actually the main focus of my passion these days.
So, just to know more about it, you're talking about that there was some kind of impositions in the university. What was the nature of these impositions when you're in the university? There were those religious impositions which made you go towards religion or inquire religion more.
At different levels, you could see this kind of imposition. On one hand, there were people in the government, they followed this, utopian, Islamic world by creating Islamic knowledge. They wanted to turn everything, physics, chemistry, mathematics, sociology, psychology, you name it. They wanted to turn them into quote-unquote Islamic sciences. They wanted to Islamizate, they call it Islamization of science.
How was it done? Like, how?
That's a good question. From my perspective, that is a, wasted attempt. It's not possible. But from their perspective, they did in several levels. At the very superficial, level, they tried to impose, dress codes, force students, to participate in, a compulsory prayers. They tried to force, some level of, knowledge of Islamic jurisprudence on its students. So that was at the very superficial level. But then they actually had as I said, they had a more ambitious, goal in mind. And they wanted to make sure, especially, when it comes to humanity, they wanted to make sure that Islamic doctrines and ideas, as they understood it, for example, seminaries and so on, they wanted to make sure those conception ideas that are imposed on those sciences. For example, they say we don't need economists. We have in Islam, we know how to run a successful economy. So they wanted to articulate what they called, Islamic economy, how we can run the economy in a country to serve, Islamic values, for example, how we can remove the element of riba, for example, from banking system. So they had this kind of ambitions. I remember when I was in pharmacology department, there was a kind of, order from top that, make sure when the students, they design their PhD dissertation, they, for example, prove the virtues and values of fasting. That means in advance, they, dictated, what you need to do and what result you need to,
It should be positive. The research should be positive.
You have to explore and see whether or not there are such benefits. Not that, you have to run the experiment to prove the predetermined, conclusion. So it was quite, harsh anyway.
Many people followed it, like many people said that, okay, this is fine. But you had, as you said, you had a problem with this. What was the reason of you being uncomfortable rather than assenting? What was the reason for your dissent? Was there a theology in the background or any thought process in the background?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I grew up in a very non-religious family. So suddenly, everyone, including me, had the opportunity to expose in a more traditional version of religion, at the public level. And so I was curious, what is this kind of, doctrines, ideas worth for you? On the other hand, it became a necessity because I was doing science and some people, they wanted me to, somehow comply some norm and values external to the discipline. And I was curious, to what extent it makes sense or it can be sensible, and to what extent, it is some sort of impossible task to pursue. So I think at the beginning, it was a kind of imposition out of necessity, but then it leads to curiosity. And I always had a soft spot for, Islamic mysticism. Rumi, Ghazali, and Attar, they were, my teenage, passions, getting myself familiar with teachings and so on. I had a very impact, a spiritual impact on me early on in my youth. So I think the combination of these things forced me to take religion more seriously. And I have to ask, I had the privilege of having some very good, teachers at high school and later on, at university, who were, quite knowledgeable people with a very, positive spiritual energy. And I think they played a significant role to create and cultivate this, intellectual and spiritual, interest, which was, more or less related to religion. So there was some personal level, some luck having, good mentors. And of course, society at large was dealing with this question.
Sometimes it happens, you get fascinated because you're on the outside. But then when you come inside, you realize that, oh, this is not actually what it was.
That's
so
true.
Did this happen during your journey with Islam? So you were looking for Islam, like, oh, it's all about Rumi and all. And then when you started studying Islam and doing properly, how did this impact your relationship with Islam and all?
It is actually, you're mentioning something very interesting. The kind of Islam was, imposing on the society through government was a kind of, some sort of legalist approach to Islam. A group of fuqaha, jurists, they define what Islam is. And that was not the kind of Islam I was exposed to. I knew Islam through the lens of mystics, Rumi, which is actually a combination of love and beauty in the realm of religion. So it was very, uh, emotionally rich and aesthetically speaking, pleasing. And so you suddenly find yourself, with a completely different version of Islam, which was harsh, which was not tolerant. We wanted to shape our lives in a way they thought would be appropriate, completely ignored, how people, they want to, pursue their lives and happiness. And so there was somehow we were trying to create a place to breathe, So I think probably subconsciously, I was thinking, okay, now if you want to survive in this society, you have to redefine your relationship with religion. But the kind of religion was imposed through government on society was not, it was not flourishing. It would, suppress your soul. It would kill your soul. So I thought, there might be an alternative. And I think mysticism was some sort of alternative to me. And later on, I learned that, the kind of Islam, the government tried to impose on the society, it was only one version of Islam. And gradually I learned about, the process of and the tradition of reform in Islamic thought. And so I thought, there is a possibility that while I can, protect myself, I can preserve my aesthetic spirituality in mysticism, my commitment to that, aspect of religion. Probably we can expand it, and we can, help ourselves and other people in a community to criticize this version of Islam, which political version of Islam, and come up with something more humane, aesthetically and spiritually more satisfying and pleasing.
Or in this journey, when you see that there is this spiritual disquiet against the system you have, and you feel like, okay, I feel uncomfortable, and then you kind of like, oh, this discourse doesn't make any sense. I am uncomfortable, and then you feel you're lonely because, as you said, you think that the way traditional Islam, or however you may term it, there is this only one way. But then you go on to inquire and know about, and then you see, you are not the only one who had this journey of being uncomfortable or that spiritual disquietness. There were other people, and then you read their works, and then you see there is this scope. So was there any scholar or particular book that actually you felt like, oh, you don't want to leave Islam because because there is also one way people would say that, okay, this is not making sense. They're trying to impose things on us. Okay, let's leave it. But as you said, you had certain affinities. You had to be towards mysticism and all, but you were uncomfortable with what was being imposed. So was there any scholar or any book that impacted you? You were like, oh yeah, I resonate with the way they have approached this.
Right. I vividly remember, I think the first time I found something refreshing in Islamic literature, it was while, I was quite familiar by the time. I was probably 17, 18 or something. And I started, learning about mysticism early on, probably in the beginning of my teenage years. So by then, I knew enough about mysticism to be fascinated by. But I think I vividly remember the first thing that attracted me to this kind of intellectual approach to Islam was a paper, a talk, a lecture that Professor Abdul Karim Soroush delivered in Mashhad about Shariati, Ali Shariati. And so I found the kind of, commitment to reason and rationality in that speech that I found it quite refreshing. And then I had the opportunity to get to know Soroush and, his school of thought more closely. And I think Soroush had a great influence, especially at the time that other voices were silenced, in society. And he had among many few, because of, his past history with the government, he had still the opportunity to, have a voice, and have, his own circles and so on and so forth. So that was the beginning of, uh, getting, connected to a movement. At the time, it was at the beginning. It was very, young at the time. And I was lucky enough to, cross that path road. And yeah.
You also match it because he was also, I think, PhD in chemistry, and then he into philosophy, and are same as pharmacology, and so you have a lot of similarity.
He was really, really good in presenting Rumi. He was a master of, Rumi's poetry. He had a magic, in his voice, in his interpretation of Islamic mysticism. So he had all the good things. On one hand, he had a very, articulated, well-versed, man of mysticism, philosophy, theology, and of course, he was a man of science, right? So in a way, he exemplified, a kind of balanced combination of these different, sometimes conflicting, elements. So I think he was a source of inspiration for me and many other people, at the time. And then, due to my interest in Islamic mysticism, I remember I was very young. I was early 20, that I wrote an article about the relation between master and disciple. And then a friend of mine recommended me to take it to the Kiyan magazine. Kiyan magazine, at the time, they published the first issue. So it was brand new. And we didn't know them much. We know, there was a history behind it, or close to Soroush. And due to our fascination, with Soroush, we decided to, build the connection. So they were generous, we were nobody at the time, very young, kids. So they invited me to their office, one of my friends and I. And I took they already, had my article. And so we talked about the article, and they said, you know what, we want to publish it.
Wow.
Which was a big deal, But of course, unbeknown to me, I think in the first issue of the magazine, they published an article by Dr. Soroush, in which, he criticized the idea of imitation, which was a kind of tradition among, in Shi'i seminaries. And Soroush criticized that, they are pushing that kind of mentality to universities. So he was critical of, some aspect of the government in his that lecture. And when the first issue was published, the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, delivered a very harsh, public speech. And in his speech, he actually criticized, Soroush's talk as, hand of enemies and so on and so forth. So in the second issue, they decided to publish my article. It was about, a master at the time. And that was the criticism of that, related. So unbeknown to me, I think, some people took it as some sort of, following that, criticism that, the Supreme Leader didn't like. But they were quite generous, and they invited us, to join their editorial board. And so we had this wonderful opportunity to become as a part of, a wonderful, intellectual religious movement in Iran that, lasted for some decades. And so
I wanted to ask you about this, because we usually sometimes, when we read this literature about reform in Shiism and all, we hear this about this Kiyan circle, which to like someone like us seemed like a really cool circle of intellectuals and all. So how was it? And because the Kiyan Farhang was a part of it, journal. So what was it like, and how were the discussions? What was the movement about? What was this Kiyan circle?
I think the beginning of the journal was the time that, politically speaking, the society was very closed. There were no much, public spaces to share and communicate, ideas. And so these people, because of their past history, they had some sort of, opportunity to do something rather different. And they were smart and they took advantage of it. But, there were a variety of people from different groups. Since they didn't have any public space to, come together and work together and so on and so forth, they happened, come to Kiyan. So people from different political and cultural groups, they found some sort of home here at Kiyan. And I remember every Wednesday, we came together at Kiyan's office, and so we picked, some sort of theoretical topic, and we had a group of, very smart people, attending these meetings, and we present, we discuss, we articulate our thoughts. We, try to get some ideas for the next issue of the journals and so on. And every month, one day, I think one Wednesday in each month, every month, a larger group, which were not only, people interested in intellectual activities, but also some people with more political, inclinations. They also joined for just chatting, having dinner together and so on. And actually that built one of the, the centers that actually later on, in a way, I have to be, careful about the word I'm choosing, but in a way, they contributed in an effective way to the reformist movement in Iran that ultimately, led to the presidency of Sayyid Muhammad Khatami.
So just taking on the reform motion, as you talked about generally, so in your works also, the basic question would be, which is generally also, why reform? First of all, at the second point, why should we listen to, for example, the Muslims in general, to whom the reform discourse is talking about? It would be first like, why reform? We are happy where we are. And why will we listen to someone like you? So how do you answer this? How would you like to answer this question? Why reform first?
The reform discourse, I think it is beneficial for two groups of people. First of all, as a person of faith, if you are a believer, I think it is a central question for everyone, how you can, as a believer, how you can remain a devout Muslim and at the same time, a real, authentic, helpful member of the community, a modern society, right? So it seems that we are suffering of some sort of schizophrenia. On one hand, when we are in the corner of our prayers and we are worshiping God, we are living, in 12th century. But then we go to the work, when we go to the university, suddenly we are a part of, 21st century. And there's a schizophrenia. I think we are living as if in multiple worlds, and there are no clear connection between these worlds.
Well, why would you say that is a traditional, like that's why would you say that's a time travel? Why is that?
Let me give you an example. Let's say you are a woman. And as a woman, you think you have every right like your brother, You're a young woman, you think like your brother, you have a right, to go to the university, go to the school, hang out with your friends, in park, exercise and so on, have some sort of bodily freely, right? But the traditional Islam says, wait a minute, not so fast, right? According, for example, to traditional Islamic jurisprudence, your body doesn't belong to you. As long as you are not married, your body belongs to your father. And then when you get married, your body belongs to your husband, right? And then you have to, follow a certain, dress code, obligatory, not, by your choice. They are forced. And then, when you go to the job market, say, it doesn't does it make sense, women work? It is your place, is it at home? The family law was the first law in Iran after Islamic Revolution that, they just put it aside. They said it is un-Islamic. Why? Because women, they have right to divorce, right? So as a woman, you're living in that society. You are a devout Muslim, right? But at the same time, you think, these rulings, they are unfair and unjust. It actually prevents you from, achieving your full potentiality, right? So as a woman, you are facing, wait a minute, is it not my religion that is suppressing me? Can I still, be a faithful, committed Muslim, and at the same time grant that, my husband has a right to, have 3 more wives? I doubt if as a woman you are going to buy that arguments.
There are, first of all, it's very difficult to, as a man, talk about what women say. And I don't think I should even talk about it, but just to put the argument here is there are certain section of women who say that, oh, you men, you liberal men, don't do talking on my behalf. I am comfortable with this hijab. I am comfortable with, and also the other discourse is that one aspect of tradition might say this, but there is a spectrum,
right,
which doesn't say that brutally as the brutally you might have put it.
Right.
So how does it still become relevant, the reform discourse, in a sense, because there is, some would say, there is an element of westernization as well.
Right. See, there are 2 different things. Let's say, you say, you know what, I don't want to eat food. I want to fast, hunger struck or so. That's your choice, right? But in society, and no one has right to force you to eat or to force you to fast. But everyone should has equal opportunity, access to food, right? You have access to food, but now it is your decision to fast or you to eat. That's your choice, right? So the point is this, it's not that, we should push women to go to the universities, to workplaces, and so on. No. The point is, men and women, they should have the opportunity to go to the school if they want, to stay home if they want, to work if they want, to, just, raise family if they want, right? So it's not a matter of forcing women to, follow or conform to this value system or that value system. The point is, if you want to be a Muslim, it should be your choice. If you decide to, follow a different, type of, religious life, that should be your choice. If you don't want to conduct any religious life, that should be your choice, right? So society should create this safe space in a reasonable, restrictions, in like every other societies, that, people, they can follow their conception, they pursue their conception of happiness. You cannot impose your understanding of happiness on other people. Everyone has equal right to decide what happiness means to them and pursue that, right? So you can, stay home, do, raise your family. Good for you. If that's your choice, do it. But if you want to live differently, no one should, force you to suppress you and so on. So that is the point I'm saying. So the reform was not that, women, you should, give up your hijab, or, you should force to use hijab.
But it also comes from that perspective, it has this trying to put what the other side sometimes is that this notion of, human rights, or this notion of rights is based on a sense of individualism,
right,
where you consider individual as separate. But in many societies, especially Muslim society, the communitarian self is there, where you don't look at yourself as just an individual, but you look at yourself as a part of the community. And sometimes they also say most of these reformers, They're usually not even in the part of the community. They're speaking a different language. They are dressed differently. Some people might say to most of the reformers, like some people say to Soroush that he is sitting in US and telling what should be in the Iran. He's talking, wearing Western dresses and all. So they see that there's a whenever even they're asking for reform, they are just telling what I feel comfortable in. You should also feel comfortable in that. How would you approach this dilemma?
Well, when we talk about human rights, all human rights are not individualistic. We have some group and communal human rights. For example, I believe, the ethnic minorities, they have human rights to their national language, for example. They have, basic human rights to self-governance, right? So when we talk about human rights are not limited and restricted to individualistic rights. And I believe both rights should be honored in order to have a decent human life. Let me give you an example. For example, this idea that human rights are coming from Western civilization.
The Western idea of human, not
right.
The Western idea of insan.
For example, let me give you this example. In traditional Islamic jurisprudence, everyone has 4 fundamental rights. For example, you have right to your property, you have right to your life, you have right to your belief, and you have right to your dignity, right? So all Muslim jurists recognize these fundamental rights, right? Why? The reason is, in order to be a decent, dignified human being, these are the basic necessities that help you to flourish as a human being, right? It is not about West or East. It is about humans as such, right? Now, of course, when the humans come together and form different groups and communities, as a result, as a group also, they have rights which actually attributes to the group rather than individuals. Let me give you an example. For example, the communal right to natural resources in a land. The right holder is not you and me, but it is, us as a community. So in this case, the right holder is the community as a whole. So I'm saying, the contrast between individualistic and communal human rights, probably it is not accurate. I understand there was a time that, people made that mistakes. But if we are careful enough, we will see, no, actually they are complementing one another. And it is not about, becoming, laissez-faire, do whatever you want. It is about, creating a society in which people, they can flourish, right? What is the value of a religion if it is forced upon you, if it is not, chosen freely out of your deep desire for God, right? If you are forced, that's why, in religion, I think it is important, when God says, La ikraha fi din, one of the meanings is, try it. You cannot, force feed, people's religion.
But many relationships are forced and they still have the meaning. For example, my parents, I wasn't, I didn't have a choice.
Right.
But I still value the relationship. So it doesn't mean if something is given there, it loses value.
No.
Many people would say that they are comfortable with what is there, even if it's imposed, but it's still there.
True. But the question is, do you think, human choices has value or not? Which one would you rather? Let me give you this example. Think of this, thought experiment. Let's say a group of, Harvard students, they think, we came up with a brilliant idea. Since they are extremely, smart people, they say, look, we are going to start a startup. And here we are going to make decision for people who sign up for this program. And we make the best decision for them, right? So they come to you. And let's say they are right. Say, look, we are going to make the best decision for your life. Anytime, about your career, your partner in life, your major, and so on and so forth, right? So let's say they actually can deliver, right? So ask people how many of them they want to, okay. But as soon as you sign the contract, that's it. You cannot interfere. They are going to make all the, life-changing experiences for you. I try this, raise this question to my students all the time. And I ask them, how many of you would sign this contract? Very few. Because people, they say, even if, I make mistakes, it is my mistakes. I learn from it. It helped me to improve. That means people appreciate free will, having the ability to choose on their own, even though, it leads to some mistakes. If that is true, then that means, people, they cherish, this freedom. It is important. It's a part of the things that make you a real human being. That's the difference between you and a robot, right? You make your decisions. If it is good, you are praiseworthy for it. If it is bad, you are blameworthy for it. That means you take responsibility for your action. This is how you grow. So, of course, you can always, indoctrinate people to hold religious beliefs. But compared to the person who, out of deep experience in his or her life, finds himself or herself fascinated with the divine, that mystery, in the universe, and fall in love with God, which one seems to you more valuable? I would say, arguably, those accomplishment that happens due to your personal struggles and choices you make has more values. Now, to be fair, it doesn't mean all the time in all cases that is the case. No, but I'm saying as a general rule, you always, can think, imagine you have a kid, okay? There are two scenarios. One scenario is, you make all the choices for your kids, no matter how old he or she would be. The other one is, no, you teach them a kid, right and wrong, and then leave your kid alone and let the kid, make his or her own choices. I think probably the second one is a more positive way to help your kid to grow and flourish than, that, helicopter parents, that, make all the decisions for their kids.
But sometimes they would say, going to an epistemic authority is my decision. For example, going to a doctor and whatever the doctor says, now I have to follow. So where if they will, because my question in this instance is, the Reformists have been saying this, and going by your thought experiments, people should have the freedom. But we see still in the, talking about Islam, majority of, there is, repulsion would be a strong word, but this idea is not being liked as much as by the community.
Sure.
It exists more in an academia than in the community.
That is true, because,
Why is so? If people would choose freedom,
right,
people will go for freedom. Why is this the case, that this reform movement is not, people are not connecting it with the way as a community as they should be?
Right. There are a few things. First of all, I think it is important that, to emphasize that you cannot and you should not force people to this or that type of lifestyle. The point is to offer them the opportunity. Now, if you decide to, live your life in a very, let's say, a close community, strict rules, obey the authorities, that's your choice. If that is the life you want to have, go for it. You should have that opportunity. But you should give the same equal opportunity for people who rather to conduct their lives differently. So here we are saying, you should have, equal opportunity and equal capability to conduct your life in the way you prefer.
But they would say Islam means, they would say that this means sense in a secular word, but we would say, but Islam means surrendering, or the taslim means surrender. So a Muslim is to surrender your will.
Right.
So I'm being Islamic, so I'm surrendering my will and I'm just following the law of God.
Surrendering your will is a willful act.
Yeah, just I have surrendered my will.
Good. It is your choice. So you have to have it.
After that, the obligations come.
Okay.
After that, you are mandated to fast. After that, and you're mandated to be a part of Muslim community. How would you respond to this?
No, I think you have every right to do it. It is your right. It is your will, right? You say, This is my decision. I'm going to surrender my, will to my religion or to the authorities.
Is it not that the view of Islam as well, that you surrender?
No, I don't think so. So, for example, when you talk about Mu'tazila, they believe there are, even, Shi'i scholars, they believe, the matter of faith, usul al-din, they are not, matter of, submission. You have to do your research. You have to intellectually involve and engage and, choose and accept them on your own. You cannot, follow authorities when it comes to the principle of Tawheed, the existence of God, the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad, life after death. They are not matter of taqleed. They are all matter of taqeed, right? Of course, when you did your research and you ultimately got to the point that this is the religion I want, then you have every right to submit your will to this religion and then follow the authorities in this role. However, even in the case of taqleed, you are doing taqleed based on taqeed. That means at any time, if your mujtahid, for example, is not adil just anymore, you have every right to, reject this mujtahid and go to another mujtahid.
Like what makes you religiously back this statement, as in, you have this right to what you call, because the community, the reform you're asking is among the Muslims, is Islam, who have surrendered. Already they have surrendered. That's only, then it's going to make sense to them. If they're not following the religion as per se, the reconstruction of religion doesn't make any sense. They're already sure. This is for the people who have already surrendered. Okay. So now you're asking them to reform.
No. You're not asking people to reform. If you'd rather to, live your traditional life with traditional beliefs, you should have to right to do it. But you have no right to impose your position on other people. You have to create a room for other people to make their own choices. You made your choice. This is a kind of lifestyle you chose. Go for it. If that makes you happy, go for it. As long as you are not, undermining other people's right. So far, so good. The problem is when you might say, just as an example, that, you also should live your life as I am doing. I'm saying, no, your decision is as valuable as mine. I have no reason to believe you have right to choose your lifestyle and then impose your lifestyle.
But I would say, I want you to live the way God is saying. Amar bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. Like they would say, we want not as I, because the Jewish is not saying you should live the traditional Jewish. He's not saying you should live the life I want. He said you should live the way God wants.
Right, the way I understand it.
So how would you say that?
No, the way you understand it. I understand, God's, way of life differently. And actually, it is true. If you think there is only one unified way to God, I think historically speaking, we know that is not true. The kind of, Islam Al-Ghazali had was fundamentally different than the kind of Islam, for example, Ayatollah Khomeini exercised or Rumi advocated. So we have different, version of Islam.
What was it? Can you give some more detail about this Islam?
So for Ghazali says, for many people, they believe the essence of Islam is law, right? Following jurisprudence. For many people, the essence of Islam is having right beliefs that manifests itself in theology and kalam. And for many people, the essence of Islam is having that union with God. So they are all Muslims. Rumi is Muslim, Ghazali is Muslim, Khomeini is Muslims. There are different Muslim, Taliban, they are Muslims, and your institutions, you are Muslims, right? They are all Muslims, but they have different understanding of God's ways, right? So as long as this diversity is concerned, I have no problem with it. The problem is when someone says, my way is God's way, and everyone else should follow my understanding of God's way. That seems to be problematic. We have no reason.
That you think is a way of intolerance.
Right. That means when you are living in a society, the society is a common property of every members, and every member should have equal right to manage this common property, right? And when you want to manage this property, justice requires you to manage this common property, milk musha, in a fair way. That means, you have the same right as me, because this is our common property. Let's say you and me, we share this room, right? So how should we decorate this room? You cannot dictate all the terms. We have to negotiate and find a way that, both feel comfortable here. That's the principle of justice. And this community, the society we share, this is a common property of every member. Muslims, non-Muslims, theists, atheists, right? And when it comes to public sphere, you have to manage the affairs of public sphere in such a way, that, everyone has equal right to participate, effectively and actively participate, managing the society. That's a requirement of justice.
Even if the dissent.
Or even the dissent, yes, of course. Of course, we always, we should recognize the dissent in the community, but it doesn't mean the dissent, they can do whatever they want. For example, in the Quranic language, the vice of, ifsadul fil ars, that means, you attack the basic fabric of the society. And push society into a state of lawlessness. No, in every, reasonable society, the society resists that kind of destructive forces. However, you have every right to civil disobedience. If you think the law of the society is not fair, you have every right to publicly announce that I'm going to disobey the law, and then commit yourself to the prescribed punishment. In this way, you can, express your dissatisfaction, invite other people to hear your concern, and try to, somehow activate their moral sensitivity and convince them that work with you and change the law.
Was there ever in Islamic tradition an example of such a society existing?
In Islamic tradition, we have two different models actually happens in history. One model is the Ottoman Empire. In Ottoman Empire, we had a model of toleration in society. Ottoman Empire was in a combination of variety of people, ethnicities, and religions, and so on. So Ottomans, they decided to manage this society in a way that while it preserves their dominance, but at the same time create a room for all these different people to live their lives. They didn't want to interfere with their life and create chaos and so on. So they created a kind of vertical, toleration in society. That means the ruling society creating a structure. As long as you are not, challenging the authority of the, higher society, you can live your life. You can have your church, you can have your schools, and live your life. They tolerate that. That was one model that actually lasted more than 500 years in Islamic. It was not an ideal model, but compared, let's say, to what happens to Christian kingdom, that Jews, they had to, flee the countries, because, they were, subject to massacres, right? So they had to, come to Islamic world. While it was not ideal, but still, they created space for them to, live their lives and so on. The second model we have is in India at the time of Akbar Shah. Akbar Shah created a different model of toleration. You may call it horizontal moderation. He actually believed, all the religions, they are welcome. And he created a society in which you are respected, not because to the extent that, you are not challenging the power of the dominant ruling class. But, we try to recognize the diversity of the society and create a rule of the land that, gives everyone more or less equal rights. It was not an ideal system, but, given the circumstances, it was one of the best models for toleration. Not recently, a few years ago.
Would you call that an Islamic model? Because people say it was Din Ilahi, he wasn't following the...
And it was greatly influenced by, Islamic mysticism and, Islamic theology. Yeah. So I think Muslims, they had this, the different political experiences. And nowadays, even, Akbar Shah experience, actually influenced, better than me, the whole, this modern India, creating modern India. He was a major source of inspiration for Nehru and others. So I hope, it becomes source of inspiration for the rest of the Islamic world. So I'm saying, historically speaking, Muslims, they had these two different models of toleration. So we are not, a stranger to this kind of lifestyle. On the contrary, this kind of intolerance you are experiencing in the Islamic world, in Taliban and these extremists, Shia extremism, Sunni extremism, they are rather neither new and marginalized in Islamic society. They are not representing the majority of Islamic mentality.
Coming to our last section, you talked about how Akbar's thing was based on mysticism. You think, what according to you, because you're giving an expertise to a modern human, what, where all many needs has been satisfied due to the growth of technology, AI, all those things. What does mysticism still has to offer to a modern human, giving your...
I think one of the challenges modern human being is facing is the lack of meaning in their lives. We lost that meaning. One of the reasons is, in many cases, meaning has something to do with narrative, right? If you can tell a good story, you create meaning, right? So imagine that, your life is a blank notebook, right? The way you're conducting your life is as if you're writing in this book. So you are writing the story of your life. Now, if you live your life in a very scattered way, disconnected, random, jump from one to another, imagine now at the end of your life, you publish this book and put it in the library. How many people that are going to read it and enjoy it? So it's chaotic. But if you live a coherent, beautifully crafted life, everyone enjoy it. Why? Because it conveys a totality, consistency, beauty in it, right? So there is a connection between the element of meaning and the concept of, narrative. Now, in the old time, we are living in the context of a grand narrative provided by religions, and including mysticism. The world has a God, and God has a plan for everyone. God created this master play, and everyone plays a role in this performance, gigantic, global, cosmic, play. And therefore, that you're born, you play your role, and you die. The metaphor, people, they used to use for humans' life was the metaphor of seasons. Your life had season. Everything comes naturally one after another. So in this context, your death is meaningful because your life has a meaning, and vice versa. But in modern time, one of the first things we challenged was those grand narratives. We get rid of them, right? And suddenly, we are in the middle of nowhere, just, wandering around. And therefore, we are facing, this painful question of what is the meaning of life, and I think reviving some version of mysticism is one of the ways you can create a meaningful narrative for one's life. within which, by participating in that narrative, taking that narrative seriously, you can have a very authentic, inspiring, beautiful life experience. This matter of union with God, aesthetically speaking, emotionally speaking, it is extremely enriching, right? But the problem is we are living in a world in which, our path to God has been blocked in a variety of ways. Let me give you an example. For many Muslim mystics, if you ask them what is the best way you can, feel connected to God, they would tell you, what would you tell you? Do you know? What would be the best, advice they give you? They say, fall in love, right? Fall in love. Why? Because they believe, experiencing love gives your soul a kind of tenderness, sensitivity that makes you more capable of, connecting to the transcendent. But we are living in a world in which love becomes more and more difficult. If you ask, someone like Jean-Paul Sartre or, some feminists, they would say, love is, more or less impossible. We are living in a world in which, sex and, bodily pleasure, they replace that kind of tender emotions and, the kind of cultivating, that kind of flourishing emotions in humans. They actually Sartre and many other, existential, thinkers and the scholars, they truly believe we are living in the crisis, in love crisis. And I would say that's one of the reasons, we are living in an age of a spiritual crisis. There are certain experiences we need to have. You need to experience the beauty and the awe of the nature in order to have a sense of, the awe of God, the mystery and beauty of God. But we are living in the, safe zone of all these, civilizations. You're protected. When you go outside, you see cars. They're all man-made, nature around you. You can see the magnitude of natural phenomena that makes you humble. You don't have that kind of experiences. And as a result, I think these experiences became rare and rare. And as a result, we became blocked of having that kind of spiritual experiences. So if you ask me, I think mysticism, if we are lucky enough, can provide us opportunity to have a kind of reception, a kind of sensitivity that, connects you with something transcendent, something beyond ordinary. And as a result, I think it colors you, makes your life colorful and meaningful. And if you can achieve that level, I think that's the greatest achievement and gift mysticism can give to this modern human being.
You can say that in a way, they have to the essence of religion in that sense is the revival of love. The reason needs to be purified by love.
Right, love of God and union with God. Yeah, if you ask Sufis, they say the ultimate level is fana, and baqa'i ba'd al-fana means losing yourself in God and living in God.
This is only what one of my last questions is. So sometimes when you talk about this, because I see these two tendencies in you, so you will be the best person to answer this question. So in one side, this mystic who says fana and like love and all, and then you have this Dissent side where you are like, because usually from fana we take somebody ascetic who is not, but you have these two tendencies. How do you correlate this? On one side, you are like you're dissenting, you're being crucial, and on the other side, you have this mystical. How do you think these two worlds come together?
Yeah, at a very personal level, if you ask me, at the very, very personal level, I think my first love and passion is, that kind of, image of the world that mysticism portrayed for us. However, I think I concluded after, some life experiences that, in order to make that kind of experiences available to more people, you need to restructure your society. Within the society which filled with, discrimination, injustice, cruelty, love for money, for material objects, in the society which is the dominant structure, that, the vulnerables, they are ignored. And we don't care for minorities, for people who don't have voice. In this, corrupted, social structure, it is really, really difficult to have a flourishing, spiritual, aesthetic, beautiful, spiritual experiences mystics, they recommended us to have. So in a way, I think the attempt to build a more just society, less corrupt society, more egalitarian society, I think this is a right step to create an environment within which, people, they have better opportunity to experience God. And keep in mind, more or less, that was what the Prophet Muhammad did. He was for, and, more important than anything, he was a social reformer. And he tried to create some sort of egalitarian. So when he came to, he became the prophet, one of the first things he did, he challenged three things. One, the polygamy, tribalism, and a kind of this idea of, let's say, worldliness. All of them, when you translate them in social level, for the Prophet Muhammad, all these elements, they led to social injustice. So the first practical thing he did was, to ban usury, riba. And the language Quran uses against usury, it is mind-blowing. Why? Because at the time, in that society, that was one of the major people, the powerful, exploit the vulnerable and created an unjust society. I think he realized that, his spiritual mission cannot be achieved and accomplished in a fundamentally, corrupted society. So I think this is a good message.
In an unjust society, it's incapable of love. So for love to be there, justice has to be there.
Exactly. That's a very beautiful way to put it. I agree.
So I would want to end this session with you in this by one request, if I could, is that since you have been studying Rumi and Hafiz, so is there any of your favorite couplet that you can share with me and the viewers?
There's a lot. It is really hard to choose. But I think every time anyone asks me that question, I immediately, my mind goes to the last book of Rumi, Masnavi, the book 6. Toward the end of it, Rumi suddenly, stopped, creating Masnavi. And when other people, ask him why, he didn't, respond. He avoided. But there are some verses toward the end of Masnavi that actually explain why he stopped, creating this masterpiece. He says, "So far I was wandering on the land, but now I'm at the edge of ocean. When you are on the land, horses, they are right, the right way to go. But now at the edge of this ocean, you have to switch to a boat. Now, when you take the boat, markabe chubin, that means wooden carrier or something. That means, what's called the dead body. We put dead body on a coffin. Right. It means both and coffin both. So Rumi felt that he was dying. But the way he portrayed his experience, this, experience of death was quite remarkable. He thought, I was having this journey on this land in desert. Now I'm at the edge of a new world, an ocean in front of me. Now, when I want to go to the depth of this, world, I have to change the vehicle I'm using. So far it was horse. Now I have to use this boat. Then he asked, do you know what this boat is? This boat is silence. That's my vehicle to take that journey. So then I take this journey with this boat of silence in the middle of ocean. But still, there is a, some sort of, barrier between me and the ocean. I'm still on the boat, not inside the ocean. So I'm going to break this boat. Now I'm going to the realm beyond words and silence. I'm now a fish in the heart of the ocean. I thought this guy was so beautifully described, his existential state of being when he saw death. It was such a refreshing, such a beautiful experience a human being has of his death. And he said, that is why I'm now living in the realm beyond words and beyond silence.
Well, that's so amazing. And I think, that's going to stay with me, I think, for a long time. Thank you so much. And I hope it will be with the viewers as well. So I'm still thinking about it, not just beyond words, because usually it's just silence, but it's just something beyond silence.
Yeah.
So on that note, I thank you, Dr. Arash, for your company, your time. It really has been a journey for me. I feel like in different points of time, I was with you in this whole journey. So thank you so much for giving your time. And I hope that the viewers will also have been with us in the journey of learning and unlearning, which is important. So in case if you have any questions or any comments, you can just put it in the comment section or email us. And if you have any topic in mind or any guest in mind we should invite for the podcast, please let us know. Thank you.